Welcome back to Short Story Long. I am extremely excited about this episode because you are arguably the podcast god, especially in this lane of podcasts that I decided to play in. And I'm thankful to our friend Ryan Holiday for connecting us, and thanks to you for coming by at 8:30 in the morning on a Sunday.
My pleasure.
Tim Ferriss, welcome to Short Story Long.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. This
And
is
all
great.
coming out on an early morning on a Sunday.
Yeah, man. You're promoting your book. Your book just came out yesterday. It is called Tribe of Mentors.
It is.
And you showed up here with like sort of looked like you were maybe like gonna hike Mount Everest, or like you were promoting a book. One or the other.
I have one small blue duffel bag, and I have a tactical practical backpack that has extension capability, much like a rucksack, somewhat military.
And how long were you in LA?
I've only been in LA 36 hours.
Jesus.
And then I was off the grid for a period of time, almost 3 weeks. And that contains everything that I needed during that period of time.
Oh, wow. So that
including my entire podcasting studio, per se.
Jesus Christ, man. Those two bags contain trip to LA to promote a book, able to produce a full podcast, and off the grid for 3 weeks.
Yep, and all the clothing and all toiletries and everything I would need to travel out of the country.
You're a master, man. If you ever like do some terrible crime, you're escaping like easy. You know what I mean?
We'll see. I'm afraid.
Saying, leave it open.
Facebook's facial recognition.
Yeah, especially on the new iPhone.
The amount of information that Google and Apple own would make it very difficult for me to evade for long. But
if I'm putting my money on anyone, it's you.
Thanks.
Just saying.
I've watched enough Jason Bourne. Side note: I watched for every book that I write. Typically, not always, but I have 1 to 3 movies that I watch on repeat late at night, muted while I listen to music, because writing's very isolating generally if you're trapped in your own head working on a book.
Yeah.
And I like to see the human movement in the background. For the first book, the primary 2 movies were The Bourne Identity and Shaun of the Dead. So I've seen The Bourne Identity, at least out of my peripheral vision, probably 400 to 500 times, because the movie would finish, start it right over.
Why do you do that? Why do you because you don't want to be like distracted by new things? Is that why you repeat it?
That's right.
And what type of music do you listen to?
Depends on the book.
21 Savage.
I'd like to think that I'm getting progressively less filled of anger, which is an emotion I've used as a fuel from a very young age, but. For Tribe of Mentors, for instance, Beats Antique is what you might call electro gypsy music.
Okay.
Now, they do live performances with percussion and fiddle and so on, but very competent musicians based in the East Bay in Northern California. And I suppose you could call it, for lack of a better term, and I'll date myself here, but electronica. And there's also a musician named Grammatic. I don't know if you know this guy. Grammatic, TIK, who has just amazing remixes, also works behind turntables, but is just a savant at what he does. So I'm generally avoiding lyrics, with the exception of languages that I don't speak. So for instance, in the AM, if I'm doing an AM session, I really like Brazilian bossa nova music.
Yeah.
Very, very relaxing. Or Mozart, not Bach, Mozart, very specifically. But once we get to the afternoon or the evening, those 2 types of music are no longer appropriate as far as my writing is concerned.
Yeah.
So I will generally listen to electronica of some type, or if I'm falling asleep and don't want to fall asleep, then I'll listen to some type of hard-hitting heavy metal type music.
Yeah.
Seven Dust is always a perennial favorite.
God, how cool. How long does a writing session usually go, like average time?
My writing process has changed a lot over the years, and I very much enjoy focusing on books during the summer months right now.
Why?
Because I can capitalize on sun. I'm very responsive, both positively and negatively, to weather, and have contended with manic depression for decades, for as long as I can remember, which is very predominant in my family, particularly on the male side. So when I had my entire genome sequenced about a year ago, there were only a handful of things that really stood out. They're like, no, you're great. There's just a few things we want to talk about. And one was predisposition to manic depression, which on a scale of 0 to 10, they have it color-coded and so on. And mine was like spinal tap. It was like an 11, 12, 13.
Stay away from
And
winter.
I just started laughing, and they didn't know how to respond because there were doctors trying to guide me through this. And I was like, not a big surprise. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's keep moving. And the weather is a very huge component of determining whether I'm on the upward trend or the downward trend.
Yeah.
So I really like to write when it is very sunny, if possible. Also, there are other things that come along with good weather, including outdoor exercise.
Yes.
And so I have a routine in the summer, which would be, I'd say, wake up around 10 o'clock, get up, do a short round of calisthenics. I actually bought a device, which is a wheeled prowler, which is an object that you push. It's like a sled, very well known for football training, and I'm not a football player.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Where they're pushing the weights down the...
That's right. Okay. But in this case, you don't have to use it on grass. You can actually use it on asphalt. And there are hydraulics, or at least a mechanism in the wheels that allow you to get just an incredible workout. So I'll do that first thing in the morning, which allows me to take off my shirt during good weather and get sun exposure, which is something that I picked up from Rick Rubin, specifically, the music producer, who's a fascinating guy all around. For people who don't know the name, just look up this guy's discography. It will make your
and just watch like one video, whatever the first video that pops up. Like, he's just fascinating, like from the moment you see him.
Yeah, he looks like someone to be sitting on a mountaintop in India, but he also has produced Jay-Z, Johnny Cash, Metallica,
Beastie Boys.
Beastie Boys, you name it. He's probably had a hand in it. And then as I move through the morning, typically first thing in the morning, so I do some type of workout, or I should say after meditation, meditate, workout, which could be prowler or it could be swimming. Then I'll take pages from the night before that need editing, and in an ideal world, I'll get into a sauna, like a barrel sauna, and I'll edit in the sauna with 5 or 10 pages of previous work to edit. My mind cannot synthesize well. In other words, create original prose well. Or I should say best, until later in the day or evening. A lot of writers do their best work really early in the morning.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. My brain is mush in the morning.
Yeah, so what I've seen is, at least in my experience, the most prolific writers, or prolific is too fancy a word, consistent writers who put out what I would consider decent writing, operate between 10 p.m. or we can bleed like 9 p.m., although I'm actually going to go back to 10 p.m. and say 8 a.m.
Yeah.
And they either go to bed very late or they wake up really early.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is that most of the world is asleep, and the opportunities for distraction and the opportunities for procrastination that you can rationalize as being okay just go out the window. Because you can't say 3 a.m, like, no, I really need to check my inbox right now. No, you really don't need to check your inbox right now. Oh no, I really need to go have a meal right now. No, you don't. It's 3 a.m. You don't need to have a meal right now. So all of the things that writers use to avoid writing are just not available to you because they're so ridiculous.
100%.
And so I won't bore you with the entire day, but
I like it.
I actually have a script for the day when I'm writing. So I will then say edit and look at, in the case of say Tribe of Mentors, I'm really juggling hundreds of different threads and communications with various people who are being interviewed. Look at what's come in, evaluate that. I actually now, and I didn't do this for a very long time, but will fly in a researcher to live with me, primarily for the psychological benefit of having someone else around, so that I don't get overly lonely or isolated. Because that is really the death knell for me. That's not a good trigger for me. It can put me into a very dark place. So I have someone there. We review various things, maybe have some tea together, talk. Then at, let's just call it noon or 1 o'clock, we both get on bikes and get a little bit of exercise, ride to lunch, have exactly the same lunch every day.
Really?
Yeah.
For the whole book?
For the entire book.
Shit, that's cool.
Exactly the same lunch. Exact. So 2 Mediterranean wraps. I don't usually even do wraps.
Is that
right?
the meal for this book in particular?
Yeah. So the meal for this book in particular, 2 Mediterranean wraps. What is a Mediterranean wrap? It is, and I don't generally do wraps, but I prefer to have a consistent ritual than to follow a strict diet for, say, body fat, because body fat isn't my priority, low body fat.
Yeah.
So Mediterranean wrap would be, and the staff are friendly where we get these Mediterranean wraps. So in part, the staff determine the food selection, not the other way around.
Yes.
So we get these wraps, which are just chicken, hummus, tomatoes, a handful of other things with avocado added into these wraps, and then unsweetened iced tea. And sit down, continue to, now at this point, probably I'm doing, in the case of Tribe Mentors, outreach, responding to people, and then helping my researcher to craft his words in templates so that he can learn how to interact with people who are at a very high level.
Yep.
It's just different.
Yeah.
And then from, I would say, mid-afternoon, like 3 p.m. to 6 or 7, now it's starting to get dark, I'm working on writing, right?
Yep.
So I'm starting to get warmed up into synthesis.
Yeah.
6 to 7. Then go for a swim, usually in the bay or the ocean, before it gets completely dark. Ride home, continue until, say, 9 or 10, then go out to eat. Same restaurant.
So same dinner too?
Dinner has a bit more variety.
Yep.
Breakfast, no variety. Lunch, no variety.
Dinner is the same restaurant, but you can order different things, or you can fully any variety?
We'll generally have 1 to 3 restaurants for lunch. I'm sorry, 1 to 3 restaurants for dinner. And then we'll order around that. We'll bring, say, laptops or what we need to, in many cases, printouts, because I don't want to bother other diners, which is another reason why we tend to go late.
Yeah.
So I don't want to bother other diners who are trying to relax by having laptops open in a restaurant.
Yeah.
So that's yet another reason why I like to go really late, right before, close to closing time. Now, having worked in restaurants and really shitty jobs for a very long time, I mean, I grew up working as a busboy in all sorts of terrible environments.
Yeah.
I know how awful it can be to be looking at your watch, thinking you have 45 minutes left, and
Tim's
then
back,
and then Tim walks in with his laptop, right? Or whatever. Someone walks in and you're like, oh my god, this asshole's gonna drink like sparkling water for 4 hours. This is gonna suck. So I always, at the beginning of a season, meaning book writing, I will go in and I will go to the same restaurant for. This is actually good. This is something I learned when I was writing 4 Hour Chef. Go to the same restaurant during the week. So not during rush season. If there is a rush time, so not going, say, during the weekend, but like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Yep.
Every night, same place, same time. And buy like a round of drinks or shots of like the best tequila they have. For every staff, for front of house, back of house.
Yep.
And you do that for 3 or 4 days straight.
Yeah, you're fine.
Now you're in the VIP club.
Yeah.
You can chill. And they'll just be like, you know what, we're gonna clean up, we're gonna do this, this, and this, but like you're cool. Like
so good.
Because once the restaurant closes, they still have probably an hour, hour and a half of various cleanup and computation and accounting to do. And then you're in a great groove. And so then at that point you get home, it's like 11:30, 12. Maybe the researcher goes to bed. And at that point then I go into wind down. And typically I'll do, sauna is very much a critical piece of equipment for me.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be super expensive either. I mean, if you have a large enough backyard, I think it's very much worth looking at saving up so that you can get a barrel sauna.
Yeah.
Looks like a big wine barrel. And
what's the immediate, I know there's probably a million, but what's sort of like the big benefit to that?
There are many health benefits. I find it, for me, is just a way, it's a very physical and maybe metaphorical way to both start and wind down the day.
Yeah.
And to visualize the tension or stress or happenings of the day just leaving your body as the sweat leaves your body. And that's something, for instance, I mean, one of my heroes, I appreciate the kind intro. I'm still making things up, as I go along. But throughout my entire childhood, really, one of my heroes who I considered a god was Dan Gable, who's arguably, and maybe not even arguably, the most successful wrestling coach in the history of the sport.
Got it.
and also won a gold medal in the Munich Olympics without having a single point scored on him, which is impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
in wrestling.
It's unheard of.
Yeah.
It's like winning Wimbledon without having a point scored on you.
Yeah.
It just does not happen.
Yeah.
And he achieved that because he won. I'm making roughly up the numbers, but he had a something like 158-1 record in high school and college, and he lost his final match in college because I think he was distracted or lost count of the scoreboard, something like that, and he lost by 1 or 2 points.
Yeah.
And it so enraged him that he decided he would train 7 hours a day, 7 days a week until the Olympics.
And never lose again.
And just went in and won a gold medal without surrendering a single point. And to him, sauna equals, in some respects, he wouldn't say this because I think he is a religious guy, but sauna equals religion. Like he saunas every day religiously.
Yeah.
So when I have him on my podcast, which is a plan, but I could have done it beforehand, say via Skype or something like that. But I spoke with some of his family, and they're just like, "Look, if you want to get Dan like truly in his element, he's an older guy. He's had two hip replacements and knee replacements. He's an older guy, grandfather, but he still, I think he goes into a shed, like wails on this heavy bag every day, saunas every day. And they're like, yeah, you need to come to Iowa and sit in the sauna.
Oh, if you do a podcast
and then
from the
sauna.
sauna.
And then you get the stories from Dan. So the sauna is one of those odd recurring themes that you spot when you're talking to hundreds of top performers across fields. There are these really odd patterns. So that's a day, right? That's my day. And when I go into the sauna at the end of the day, I am not reviewing work. I will generally have a book that I am reading, say 10 pages of each night before going to bed. And then I'll practice something called, this will sound woo-woo to a lot of people, and it sounded very woo-woo to me before I tried it, but something called a metta practice, M-E-T-T-A, or loving kindness meditation, which I find to be an exceptionally powerful bang for the buck meditative practice, where you're really, in simple terms, thinking of one or two people for a few minutes at a time and just wishing them happiness.
Yeah.
And I find that maybe as a type A personality who's very characterized by being hypercritical of myself. It's the shortcut to being happier yourself is oftentimes not thinking of your own happiness, but actually wishing it on other people. And as far as mood elevation and smoothing out the edges for sleep, because I had insomnia for most of my life, that is as close to a magic trick as I can think of. And then I'll have, last but not least, and I might have it before sauna, maybe after, some type of tea before bed. So, for instance, reishi mushrooms are very, very helpful for sleep, as are a handful of other things that you might use. I'm no stranger to occasional CBD oil, non-psychoactive.
I've never tried that. That works well?
It can work well. It depends a lot on your personal biochemistry. So that's a day. And then it's Groundhog Day. Go to bed, wake up, and I'll repeat script. And that's it. But that is the reason why previously I viewed the creative process as something without structure. It had to be free form.
If a lot of people do.
If I'm going to come up with original ideas, I need to really be able to go with the flow and ride the muse. And I had all these poetic notions, which have a grain of truth, but ultimately ended up meaning it would take me 2 or 3 years to write a book. Now,
and a lot of people do that, right?
A lot of people do that. But what I realized is you have, I would say, to a certain extent, a finite amount of decision-making allocation for each day, including creative decisions. And the more you can create constraints for all the mundane nonsense, breakfast, lunch, where you go, how you're getting there, what you're wearing, etc., the more horsepower you have in reserve for the creative stuff. So now I'm putting together books that, in some respects, I think are much easier to read. And I'm very proud of all of the books that I've put together, but a friend of mine, very close friend of mine, Matt Mullenweg, who is an incredible guy. He is considered one of the original lead developers of WordPress, which now powers more than 30% of the entire internet.
Yeah.
And he's the CEO of a company called Automatic, which is valued at more than $1 billion. And he was one of the very first friends to read Tribe of Mentors. And he said, yeah, no, I think this is your easiest to read book.
Yeah.
It's also the easiest within which to spot patterns. And yet, the book was conceived of and gestated for a long time in my head.
Yeah.
But then you're looking at a period of no more than 6 months in which the entire book was done versus 3 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's because of your process.
It's because of the process.
Yeah.
It's because of the process. The constraints free you.
Yep.
And
I like that about you, man. That's one thing that I really like about you is like you don't, you're just a process guy, and like it doesn't seem too sort of creative, magical, crazy, right? And also,
no, because you can't. Sorry,
I
get fired up about
I want you to.
because that is if that is true, it's sad. Why? Because it's not replicable.
Yeah, I agree,
and
1,000,000%,
and it's not coachable. So if you have to depend on some God-given talent to thread this magical needle and be creative, the vast majority of people are doomed.
Yeah.
And so from the very outset, I try not to assume that that's the case. Or to at least assume that even if you have a small amount of God-given talent for, say, writing or music, fill in the blank, that there are ways to cultivate it, that there are processes, there are rules, there are constraints. And when you meet someone like I mentioned Rick Rubin earlier, I mean, the guy's report card and history is just absurd. I'm not even, I wouldn't consider myself a music person in the sense that I know a lot about the history and the nuances. Yeah. But even I can see, for God's sake, like, what has this guy not done?
Yeah.
And he has his own processes and systems and rules. And he's not a rigid thinker because he creates a structure in his life that allows him space to be a free thinker.
Yeah.
And for that reason, when I talk about these routines and so on, I don't want people to go, oh God, like I'm just not hardwired to figure that stuff out. It took me time to figure out.
Yeah.
The book that put me on the map was put together in the messiest process imaginable. And
how long ago was that?
That was 2007, April 2007. It was published.
Yep.
So it is just over, let's just call it 10 years ago, which is wild.
So you've refined this.
Yeah, back when I had more hair on my head and less hair on my chin.
You just traded it off.
And you learn over time. But the good news is that you don't have to necessarily, if you can find someone to share their recipes, you don't have to go through trial and error over 10 years like I did. You can just say, oh, Tim just described his routine. Why don't I just try that routine?
Yeah.
Or some semblance of it, right?
Is that kind of why it seems to me like you dedicate a large portion of your life to passing on that knowledge, kind of experimenting on yourself a little bit and passing that knowledge on. Is that how you see it or no?
Yeah, that's all I do.
Yeah.
It's mostly what I do. And so, for instance, if I'm interviewing someone like Tim O'Reilly, most people haven't heard of Tim O'Reilly, but he's been at the forefront of at least a half a dozen huge technological shifts in the world.
Yeah.
And fascinating guy. I mean, he can talk to you and would probably prefer to talk to you as much about Stoic philosophy and Epicureanism and all these old thinkers as he would about the bleeding edges of technology.
Yeah.
And wakes up, first thing he does, like falls out of bed and does a 2-minute plank.
Yeah.
Right. And then he has his 3 or 4 steps. Yeah. That's his boot up sequence.
Yeah.
And so I'll see that and I'll go, that's really interesting. Let me try that.
Yeah.
Or I'll talk to, Jocko Willink, retired Navy SEAL commander, legendary figure in the special operations community. His first ever public interview was on my podcast for people who want some intensity.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, you can check it out. That's tim.blog/Jocko, Jocko, which is his real name at this point, certainly.
Perfect.
Presidents refer to him on a first name basis.
As Jocko?
Like, we have Jocko.
Ah,
Yeah. And in any case, Jocko stages his meaning, places his clothing, notebook, shoes, whatever he might need for his morning workout, because he wakes up at 4:30 every morning, in his room, so that there's no thought involved. There's no deliberation involved.
Yeah.
It's wake up, grab, walk. And these are all things that you can mimic. And the morning, I think, is particularly important, even if your morning starts at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
That boot up sequence
Yep.
is really critical. And
so
I don't know who originally said this, but I certainly agree with it, which is if you win the morning, you win the day.
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of time, if you look at the, say, 11 questions that I chose for the new book to explore, I spent a lot of time thinking about which questions to explore.
Yeah.
And many of them come back to morning routines in some capacity.
Yeah.
And there's no one right answer. So to answer in a very long-winded way,
No, I like
your
it.
question, yes, I am process-focused, because just like Japan can be destroyed effectively after World War II and then go into the Meiji Restoration, bring in experts from all over the world in different disciplines, including, for instance, American experts in manufacturing efficiency who are mostly ignored in the U.S. Bring them to Japan, learn as much as possible, lay out process specifically. And what is process? It sounds fancy. It's a recipe. Right? It's a rule. It's a set of steps that you can repeat for reliable, replicable results. And then what happens? Toyota comes along, becomes this master of efficiency in manufacturing, and starts just clobbering to death U.S. automotive manufacturing with lessons they learned from someone who was largely ignored in the U.S. And I mean, many jobs were lost. It was a very politically difficult time, but nonetheless, that story kind of makes me happy.
Yeah.
It's like the
proof of concept.
What was discarded was actually a gem. You know, it's like people might have heard of Malbec wine, very famous from Argentina. It's become extremely popular. And Malbec was considered a garbage grape. And then immigrants from Europe brought this so-called garbage grape, as I understand it, to Argentina, no money, building something out of nothing. And now it's one of the most popular wines in the United States.
So is that a piece of your motivation too, is sort of finding the discarded gems? Like, would you say that's a reoccurring like mission of yours, or not necessarily?
It's a reoccurring high of mine.
Yeah.
And I greatly, greatly enjoy that, because conventional wisdom, I think, is an oxymoron almost. How can it be wise if it's common? That would mean most people are very wise, but almost by its very definition,
like average greatness.
Yeah, exactly. They don't really go together very well. And what you find is that very often the people who are getting absurdly good results are doing something that is entirely the opposite of what the A-plus players are very often doing. At least a handful of things that are completely the opposite of what the B-plus or A players would recommend.
You wonder what I love? Once again, part of the motivation for this podcast, I love the feeling. I hate the feeling of that person's just great. Like they're just special. They're just, and one of the things I say a lot is, like, growing up in Akron, Ohio, you're kind of embedded. I think a lot of small towns, I mean, the majority of the country, you're kind of embedded with, like, you're this type of person and all the achievers are those type of people, and you're not one of them. And so as I got older and moved to LA and saw more people being successful and whatever, I just sort of learned, and I'm learning it more every day as I go, that not that you can write a book that can make someone from a loser to an absolute great legend, right? But, like, there are usually things that are leading to these people reaching these achievements, whether it be as small as their morning routines or their whatever. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I like when you can put a reason to it, because then it makes it achievable, or it makes, that's the road for your own personal progress. And that's like, I like having that. I don't like looking at people and saying, damn, they're just magical.
Oh, no, not at all. And I think that it's A, depressing, B, it absolves you of responsibility. Right?
Yeah.
So, and I would actually argue that a book, and I'm not saying my books, but a book could be the seed of taking someone from feeling like a loser to being considered a legend. And I think that's actually happened a lot. And what I would say is that if you look at, maybe in some similar respects, I grew up on Long Island, rat tail and all, back in the day. And my best friend growing up died of contraindications with opiates. A lot of people where I grew up had alcoholic fathers, a lot of alcohol and drug abuse. And at the time, at least, very poor schooling. And it was not, the expectations were very low. And if you looked at everyone in that particular space, the vast majority were, and there's nothing wrong with this, but it's like plumbers, landscapers, in service industries. And the expectation was that you would most likely follow suit. Maybe you would break through and become a low-level accountant. But even the idea, the shred of a possibility that you would go to an Ivy League school, or
it's just not for you.
It's not even on the map. Like it's not so much that they say you can't do it. It's just not even conceivable that you would have that conversation.
100%. It's like a different species of.
No, it's just like, no, that's not us. So subconsciously, we're not even going to have that conversation. And so like the tools are out there for creating your best self. And in many ways, it comes down to finding very simple. And what I described in my daily routine is a lot of information, but it's actually very simple. It's not hard to understand. It's just something you need to have written down, perhaps, in the beginning. Routines and habits that you can practice so that they become part of your autopilot. And over time, you add one small thing. So I'll give you an example. This is one I learned recently. From Kyle Maynard, who is one of the people I interviewed for Tribe Mentors. And Kyle Maynard is this is family programming. I can curse, right?
Absolutely.
Fucking amazing. Kyle is just such a stud. So Kyle was born a congenital quad amputee. What does that mean? As it sounds, he has effectively no arms, no legs. I mean, he has legs cut off roughly at the hip, maybe just below the hip. And then his arms are cut off at the upper arm, and he's born that way. And that's Kyle. That was his starting point. All right, so what did Kyle proceed to do with the support and encouragement of his family? He is a member of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. Wrestling. Think about that for a second, people. All right, what are you not doing, and what is your excuse? What is the thing you want to do, and what is your excuse? This is someone with, for all intents and purposes, no arms and legs, who went through his entire first season, as one would expect, losing every single match, right? Getting pinned all the time, lost every single match. And there were people who said that it was child abuse, that his parents should face some type of consequence. And his parents stuck with him, and then he started winning. Then he started beating people. Then he started beating really good people. And the same people who said it was child abuse were like, he has an unfair advantage. And he set records in powerlifting. He was the first, as I understand it, quad amputee to climb Mount Kilimanjaro without the aid of prosthetics. So what does that mean? It means that he had effectively coverings put onto his, what would be, I can't think of a better word, but sort of nubs. And army crawled up Mount Kilimanjaro.
Jesus Christ.
Uh,
Why is he the type of person that just looks for the hardest challenge and goes and takes it? Or
I think he has learned, and I don't want to speak for him,
Yeah.
but I think this is very accurate. He and I have spent quite a bit of time together. That the more you deliberately expose yourself to discomfort and hardship,
Yep.
the more you expose yourself to scheduled hardship and suffering
Yeah.
on some level, the less unscheduled
Yeah.
hardship and suffering is going to throw you off
Yeah.
and send you into a tailspin. The reason I gave all that context is that there are little tips and tricks that are very easy to get. And he learned from a CEO a recommendation for hiring, but it's usable for many, many different things. And what the CEO did, because Kyle found himself overextended, he was saying yes to way too many things, but he didn't know how to stop. He wasn't sure what rules to use, what parameters, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's just a set of rules or even just a guideline.
Yeah.
And the CEO said, well, when I'm hiring, I'll generally go through a number of different steps, but one of them is having current employees interview the prospect.
Yep.
And then they have to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, but they can't use a 7.
Why?
They're not allowed to use a 7 because 7, it's a safe, semi-neutral, non-committal number.
Oh, man.
Once you take out 7, though, so let's say you get invited to do a speaking gig.
Yeah.
You get invited to partner with A, B, and C company. You get contacted because someone wants to do something with your podcast.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's pretty cool, but 0 to 10. If you're allowed to do a 7, you might do it, and then you'll look back and you'll say, I did that because I felt obligated, because I was introduced by my friend,
Yeah.
because I felt like I needed association with some larger brand, but I didn't really want to do it.
Yeah.
Once you have to choose a 6 or an 8,
That's a big difference.
that shit becomes real clear.
Yeah, man.
8 is close to a hell yes.
Yeah.
6 is like
Over it.
barely passing.
Yeah.
Don't want to do it.
Damn it. That's right.
And that's a really simple, it's so simple, right?
Yeah.
So when I am thinking about, like, do I really want to travel to go to X, Y, and Z? 0 to 10. What is it? No 7. Things get really clear. Your
Yeah,
decision making
that's
gets
funny.
so much better.
Damn it.
And you end up literally, I mean, you can save yourself hundreds of hours every year
Yeah.
just by getting rid of
Taking
7.
the 7 out.
That's
so
fucking
good.
magic. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's as close to magic as you get, just
Yeah.
about, right?
Yeah.
So once you have a handful of things like that you can apply everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not domain specific, right? So I'm a collector of those. It's like some people have stamp collections. Some people might have butterfly collections, comic books. I do also have comic books.
Yeah.
I collect these little recipes.
That's
And
incredible.
that's one of my obsessions.
Damn it. Another question about the book. Like you said that a lot of times you read 10 pages before bed or in the sauna. Is that the reason why you started doing this format, like what Tools of Titans is and Tribe of Mentors? Or because I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, there are a few different reasons, and just for people who don't have context, so Tools of Titans was a collection of sort of habits and routines of various what we consider successful people. Tribe of Mentors is similar. I mean, short advice from the best in the world
Yeah.
across every possible discipline, right?
Yeah.
And what you're mentioning is alluding to the format, which
Yeah.
is very short, sort of best bang for the buck,
Yeah.
action-packed profiles.
Like you can read 2 pages and
Oh,
be
yeah.
like, damn.
Yeah, each
I feel like
profile
a life change.
each profile is 3 to 10 pages.
Yeah.
And in this book, I think there are roughly 130 people. And they widely ranging, right? So you've got Ben Stiller on one hand, then you have Kelly Slater, the most successful
Yeah.
surfer of all time, on the next page, and then right after that you have like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's this incredible activist and woman who suffered from genital mutilation in Somalia and then fled to the Netherlands, self-educated, became their equivalent of a senator, as
Yeah.
I understand it. And
Insane.
also speaks perfect and writes perfect English,
Yeah.
and it's just incredible. These
Yeah.
people who are molding the world in different ways or culture, and that was it. It could have been part of the impetus for looking to provide people with a choose-your-own-adventure buffet.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't expect anyone to read necessarily the entire book in terms of, say, Tribe of Mentors. It's a big book, right?
Yeah.
But it's a cookbook. That's the way people should look at this. You don't sit down and read a cookbook from page 1 to 600.
Yeah.
God, you don't want to slam your head in a car door. It's not intended to be read linearly.
Yeah.
And so you can really jump around. And at any given time, it's like, all right, it's a Sunday. I feel like a roast. Or it's a Monday. I really need to get on with it. I need a green smoothie. All right. Well, you can find that very easily. And the intention was for it to be more field ready, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Just in terms of like military parlance.
Yeah.
Rapidly usable.
Yes.
And
it's so good for that.
Yeah. However, when I'm winding down to go to bed, as someone who is by default in problem solving mode, the last thing I want to do is give my brain more problems to solve or think about. So I don't actually read. Typically, I don't read any nonfiction in that last session. There are some exceptions. It might be something philosophical. For instance, for Tools of Titans, I was reading Zen and the Art of Archery, which did not create any problems or considerations that would then sit in my head as I'm trying to drift off to sleep. For Tribe of Mentors, and I was for decades a nonfiction purist, right?
Yeah.
Why would
That's
I read,
how I am
why,
right now.
Why would I read fiction?
Yeah.
People just making it up. I could just do that
Yep.
on my own. I can make things up myself. I want like actionable,
That's how I feel.
hard-hitting business information.
Yeah.
But I think that very often deep truths and principles are best absorbed through beautiful stories.
Yep.
Period. If you look at oral traditions throughout cultures and civilizations for millennia around the world, that is consistent.
Yeah.
And so in many cases, I've found that reading, as crazy as this might sound, fiction, beautiful fiction, like The Prophet, for instance, which is not for everybody, but beautiful book with illustrations. If you get it, get the hardcover or a version with illustrations. Or something like, for instance, right now I'm reading, I guess people generally say Hafez, but it's Hafiz, Hafiz, who is a poet in Persia who came, I want to say, roughly 100 years after Rumi, and whose poetry is just, it's beautiful, but also fucking hilarious.
Yeah, really?
It's so funny.
Really?
Yeah.
I got to try it.
Oh, it's really funny.
Yeah.
And so I'll read, say, 5 to 10 minutes in the morning, 5 to 10 minutes right before bed.
Yeah.
And that just kind of sets the tone. And that, when we talked about the boot up sequence, what's your shutdown sequence?
Yeah.
You need a shutdown sequence.
Yep.
And so the first 30 to 60 minutes of my morning, as well as last 30 to 60 minutes of my day, are very, very strongly scripted.
Yeah.
There's more wiggle room in the middle. The digestible bits and pieces in terms of, say, Tribe of Mentors and the profiles is my way of getting the foot in the door.
Yeah.
Because
with the reader or the...
With the reader.
Yeah.
Because I view it as my job. I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but it's like, what was the movie? I think it's based in Los Angeles, where Coolio's Gangsters in Paradise was part of the soundtrack. Michelle Pfeiffer, she's teaching all these troubled kids. I'm blanking
What was it?
Dangerous Minds.
There it is.
Thank you. So I kind of feel like, as a writer, if someone doesn't like your book, or if consistently people find it hard to get into your book, that's not the reader's problem.
Yeah.
That's your problem.
Yeah, agree.
And in education, for instance, one of my friends who's been in my books, Eric Weinstein, or Weinstein, depends on how you say it, mathematician, physicist, incredible guy. And he talks about, or he mentions that we often talk about learning disabilities, but we almost never talk about teaching disabilities.
Yeah.
All right. So as a writer whose goal is not to only, say, produce a smile with beautiful prose, which I don't think I generally produce, but is intended instead to give you a prescription that leads you to take action of some type. That's it. Like I view myself more like a doctor,
Yeah.
or certainly a coach. I'd say
like a coach. Yeah.
like a coach.
Yeah.
More than a writer. Books just happen to be one vehicle that I use.
Agreed.
So if I want that to be the case, I need to provide an easy gateway drug.
Yeah.
And the easy gateway drug might be rate it from 1 to 10. You can't use a 7. I tell the story about Kyle Maynard, or I say, for instance, I'll tell the story about Samin Nosrat, who's a chef and an incredible teacher in her own right, who always travels with a particular mushroom supplement to support immune function. And one of my favorite things when I'm putting together a book is going on, say, Amazon to buy all the things that I know are probably going to sell out.
Yeah.
It's like,
so good.
Buy them all in advance. And I've been using that for several months now, and I have a pretty good gauge of my immune function. It seems to absolutely have helped me
Really?
in situations where other people are just dropping like flies of different flus and so on, to not succumb to any of them.
Yeah.
And so I might give a reader that, right? So Samin's actually the first profile in the
saw
book.
that. Yeah.
And it's like, all right, like here's a little Scooby snack. And people are like, oh shit, wow. Like I can just do that right now. I'll have it in 2 days.
That's what I love.
And the little things, little things. Or someone says, for instance, one of the questions I like to ask is, what do you do when you feel unfocused or overwhelmed?
I like that one a lot too.
Or overwhelmed? What do you do?
Yeah.
And so someone might say, well, as there's a multiple-time world champion in Olympic weightlifting in this book named Jerzy Gregorek, who has an incredible story. I mean, the guy's 63, might be 64 now, and can almost certainly kick my ass. And he only weighs 30 pounds.
Yeah.
And probably most asses of people listening to this.
Yeah.
The guy is a stud. Political refugee from Poland, came to the U.S. with nothing, slept on people's floors. Now he has a beautiful home in Woodside, California, in Northern California. Absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
Looks like you're walking into a Zen garden you'd pay to visit. It's just insane. His wife's also like 5-time, I want to say, world champion in Olympic weightlifting. And he has, I'd say, a handful of poems, if he's feeling depressed, that he reads. And that's his first line of defense.
Really?
And it's just like, all right, great. Well, let's list them out. Boom. So it's like, now you have that.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, poems. I mean, I'm sure some people listening, and I had this reaction for a long time, right? And I'm not trying to sell people on poetry.
No, yeah.
It's a hard sell.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are like, oh, come on. Like, I have so much to do, so much I want to accomplish in this life. Don't have time for it. And I'm like, let me take a step back and repeat what I said. This guy has lived like 7 lives.
Yep.
He's 63.
Yep.
He can still like wipe the floor with most 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
He can stand on an Indo board, which is a balance board, right? One of these boards on a cylinder that will cause most people to just eat shit immediately. He can stand on it holding a fully loaded barbell and whip it over his head and drop into like an ass to heels Olympic snatch in an overhead squat on a balance board. He's 63.
Yeah. And he has time for poetry.
And he not only has time for it, but his first line of defense against the darkness are very well-defined poems, right? So those are the types of things. And I just mentioned a few. And the point is, much like some people like lentils. Some people love cilantro. To other people, it tastes like soap. They don't want to eat it.
Yep.
Same thing is true with the tools that people will present.
Yeah.
And so you pick and choose. And you don't have to necessarily pick and choose from the outset. Just try them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not that hard.
Yeah.
And, within the span of a few weeks, you'll be like, all right, this is my half dozen. Like, these are my sort of SWAT team. This is my SWAT team toolkit.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love seeing when that works.
It's just cool. I wish there was like a Tim Ferriss like class in high school. You know what I mean? Like I just feel like these are all I'm big on this too, but like all of these things are just things that are not taught in any sort of like the fact that they are not even spoken about in any sort of standard education at all. Like it's like it's just nuts. Which is why, and then I'll sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, which is why, even before I started writing books, because I saw the huge impact
that a few mentors had on me
Yeah.
around 9th and 10th grade specifically,
Yeah.
which is a very fragile time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, things that happen to kids in that range, if we're talking about the 14, 15, 16, we can send them off in a great direction or send them off in a fatally terrible direction.
Yep.
And I saw it firsthand. I mean, I saw these different forks, and I was very fortunate to have a handful of teachers and mentors who just to that all important 1 degree just kind of nudged me. So I ended up bumping into the next lane.
Yeah.
And holy shit, in retrospect, it's like if I'd stayed in that same lane, like maybe I would have ended up like some of my friends who've died of overdoses.
100%.
Right? I mean, and it wasn't a lot. It was a little nudge. So I thought for a long time that at some point I would go back and teach 9th grade specifically. And I don't think I would do that necessarily. I mean, I have done some teaching with an organization called build.org, actually, which works with a lot of kids in inner cities and so on, using entrepreneurship to keep kids in school.
Yeah.
But that is a really important age range.
I just wish you could teach like mindset and routine, and you know what I mean, like those are
which you can.
I know. I just wish it was more like the fact that it's still looked at a little bit. You know, I think in probably Long Island and Ohio, and to high school kids, it sounds crazy.
Yeah,
like it doesn't sound like
it sounds nuts.
But you're down to take algebra. You know what I mean? It's just like it's crazy. But I don't want to like be too preachy on that. I also will say this. What came to mind is I wonder sometimes when I stumble across like a new gem, how much of the difference between success, happiness, failure, depression is the combination of the little nudges that you get or don't get, right, in the right or wrong direction. And it's almost like, okay, so if you can acknowledge that and start to control your positive nudges and look for them, it just seems like when you really think back, you're like, man, so much of this is just a positive or negative bump and where that sends you.
Yeah, and I think most of life is nudges.
Yeah, that's essentially
that's life, man, is the nudges, whether they're nudges that you allow the external world to impose on you, or nudges that you deliberately give yourself.
Yeah.
And you can choose to invite into your life other people who will also give you nudges.
Yeah.
And so part of the impetus for the new book was that I get asked all the time, for 10 years now, I mean, every single day just about, from people on Long Island, from people in places like Akron, who say, well, Tim, you know, you're always saying that you're the average of the 5 people you associate with most.
Yeah.
Which I do say a lot. And it's very commonly said in Silicon Valley, where I had spent almost 20 years. What if I don't have 5 people I want to be the average of around me?
Yeah.
What do I do? And like, what if my peer group or the adults around me or the coworkers around me are not people I want to be the average of?
Yeah. You get 130 of them, right?
Then you get 130. And the point being that, you know, I read a book in high school, for instance, called Mental Toughness Training for Sports by a guy named Jim Loehr, Loehr, and it completely changed my life. I had the chance to meet Jim a few months ago and go train with him in person, which was just amazing. And he had no idea that I had any of this background.
Yeah.
And so in this book, I tell the story of meeting Jim and how much I learned and how the response from many people rightly would be, well, that's great for you. Congratulations. But I don't have access to Jim. And my answer would be, yes, you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be in person.
Yeah.
It can be audio. It can be text. It can be any number of things.
Yeah.
And some of my greatest teachers of all time have been dead for more than 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's just crazy that, like, and I don't want to sound too like old guy preachy here, but like how well that works. And like I notice, like, one of my reminders that I tell myself every day is I'm aware of the content that I consume and I only take in positive and uplifting messages, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, because you just don't think about it, but like you sit and watch like CNN for 2 hours and you want to like pull your hair out and go insane.
Yeah.
You read even 3 people's stories from this one, and you just feel totally different, right? And it's like learning that you can manage those nudges, I think, is such a huge thing.
Yeah, and paying attention to, and this is one of the most common patterns across these 130 people, was some type of mindfulness practice, like transcendental meditation, or it could be listening to a particular type of tonal music, like boo. It sounds odd, but Rolf Potts, who's a friend of mine, a very good writer, does that, and those will all, or for those music fans out there, Justin Barreta, who's one of the founding members of the Glitch Mob, very close friend. He practices transcendental meditation. Rick Rubin, also TM, he was actually the person who got me to take a proper training course for TM. And what all of these help you to do, among others, I'll mention several things. Number one is to become more aware of how you feel. Right? And to pay attention to that. I don't, and this is going to sound negligent, but I don't actually think it's negligent. I don't consume any news.
I read that.
It's the news that I consume is like getting hit by a stray bullet. It's just because I can't get away from it. It's like I open my phone, I'm like, God damn it, Apple! Like I upgraded the iOS. Like, why are you serving me these headlines and as pop-ups? I don't want this. So if I get hit by news, now there are a few exceptions, right? If I go to Starbucks, I'm getting whatever, an iced tea or coffee, then I'll sometimes look at the headlines. And but my assumption is, which has proven correct over 10 years, and I consider myself pretty informed, that if it's really important, I will hear about it from at least a few of my friends out of hundreds who are on social media all day. I don't need to be there. And
the problem for me is, like, especially right now when the news is so chaotic and crazy, it kicks me into this mental train of like acting as if there's something I can do about it. You know what I'm saying? Meaning like, even if that just means getting mad, getting frustrated, getting anxious, like it kicks you into like, oh, this is crazy. I can't believe this is happening. Where like, I just think even since I realized that there was a time when I was literally going home and turning on CNN every day. It was just my habit. And I realized it was just leading me into an evening of being very on edge and feeling like things needed to be changed. And I just think that when you kind of also say, there's nothing I can do about it. Like, you're going to find out if a nuclear missile is heading towards us. You'll know that.
Or do something about it. So
or that.
Don't just sit there and stew over it, though. So I think that, and I think this is probably pulling cliff notes from some type of Buddhist scripture or something like that, but accept it, leave it, or change it. Those are your three options. And Naval Ravikant, who's one of the entrepreneurs and investors I go to most for advice, fascinating guy, very close friend, who's also in Tribe of Mentors talks a good amount about this type of thing. But if it is irrelevant to you or inactionable and unenjoyable, don't consume it. I'm not saying ignore danger. But I am saying change the things that you can change, accept the things that you can. And ignore the noise to the extent possible. So for me, I was recently just thinking about. I've been thinking a lot recently about death, and I saw your tattoo on your left arm,
and I have my Ryan Holiday coin in my back pocket.
Yeah, so Memento Mori. I think about this a lot. Part of the reason I had I'm not sure how many people noticed this, but I actually had a little skull, black skull, in the bottom of my author photo, in the About the Author photo in the 4-Hour Chef, as a Memento Mori, which is what some artists used to do, at least during the Renaissance period. And Terry Laughlin changed my life. He's in Tribe of Mentors, and I didn't learn to swim until I was in my 30s. It's pretty embarrassing considering I'm from Long Island. I had a lifelong fear of swimming, and had a number of very traumatic early experiences, near drowning experiences, including one with a bully who just held me underwater until I was about to pass out, and then thankfully camp counselor came by.
That's the bad nudge.
Pulled me out. That's the bad nudge. And so I had this lifelong humiliation and insecurity related to swimming. And Terry Laughlin is the creator of something called total immersion swimming, which one of my friends, who at the time was not a friend, I actually met him for the first time. This guy named Chris Sacca,
Yeah.
who at the time was a brand new venture capitalist.
Yeah.
Nobody really, he was smart. People knew he was smart.
Yeah.
Formerly at Google, had a law degree, but it had hopped around a bunch of short stints, and a lot of people didn't really know what to make of him. And this is a guy who, just to put in perspective who he is, very funny guy, really, really funny. At Sacca on Twitter, you can check him out, Sacca. Very funny. He loves putting things out on the internet that he knows people will stupidly take literally, just to see them all get wound up and spin out. But I want to say his first venture capital fund that he put together, right, for investing in startups was $30 million. So he convinced a bunch of people to give him a total of $30 million. Yeah. And the way that venture capital usually works, it's like, all right, you create a $30 million fund, you do well with that. And a fund lives for 7 to 10 years, right? Then you do a second fund and you raise $75 million.
Yeah.
Then you do a third fund and you raise $200 million, right? And in that way, you layer those until you're up to funds of a few $100 million. Yeah. So Chris decided to skip all that, and he did a fund of like $20 or $30 million, which I very luckily, I'd love to think it was smart, but luckily invested in, which is probably going to be the most successful venture capital fund of all time in the history of the world. But then he proceeded to go, and his second fund that he put together was a special purpose vehicle. I won't bore people with the details, but it was, I think, $2.5 billion. So he's like, yeah, A to Z, I'm just going to skip everything in between. Yeah. And he made it work. So this guy is fascinating. At the time, he was just, oh yeah, this guy's trying investing. We'll see what happens, right? Yeah. But I told him about my experience with swimming. He said, I have the answer to your prayers. And he introduced me to Total Immersion. And with the Total Immersion book, not even talking about a video, by myself at a pool, I went from swimming, not being able to complete 2 laps in a pool, to doing 40 laps per workout for relaxation in 10 days.
And that was from a book?
From a book. Life completely changed forever with a skill that will never go away, that I can teach my kids, that I'd completely given up on for 30 plus years. 10 days. Yeah. With a book. Now, the reason I bring up death, though, is because Terry gave so much, and I reached out to him after this experience and became very close friends with him. And he was then diagnosed not too terribly long ago with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Jesus. And I interviewed him on my podcast on October 2nd of this year. And I think I'm getting the dates right. But October 2nd, I interviewed him on the podcast. He had lots of energy. Great podcast. I encourage everybody to listen to it. Terry Laughlin, Laughlin. And then October 10th, he had a stroke due to complications from the metastasized cancer. And then a few days later, he was dead.
Jesus.
And so that's still very fresh for me.
Yeah.
And it's heart-wrenching, but ultimately, the message is, I think, very hopefully inspiring, which is like, even if you live a long time, he was 66.
Yeah.
Which I don't consider a long time, but life is really short.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you should be stressed out all the time. That would defeat the purpose.
Exactly.
So I'm telling you, don't spend every moment rushing. I mean, to me, luxury is feeling unrushed. Right?
Yeah.
That's how I would define it. But simultaneously, when you look back, how many hours do you want to have allocated to watching CNN and taking no action?
Yeah. Yeah.
As a result of any of it.
Yeah.
I would argue it should be as close to 0 as possible.
100, yes.
And I mean, there's so many amazing things out there. It's like, if you haven't read Siddhartha, for instance, the book by Hermann Hesse, this is one of the books. I ask everybody in Tribe of Mentors, what are the books you've gifted the most to other people?
Yep.
Book or books? And the phrasing is really important. And the phrasing is really important. Not what are your favorite books?
Yeah.
Which is a problematic question for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Most of these guests or people I'm interviewing have read hundreds or thousands of books. So favorite is too hard. What have you gifted? They almost all have.
Yeah, that's a good,
1 to 4 books that are their go-to gifts. And then you can ask why and get good answers. And Siddhartha is one of the books that comes up a lot. So it's like, all right, the book's 120 pages. If you haven't read it, read that fucking book.
Yeah.
Right? You have 40.
Write that down, Dad.
Yeah. And it's just like, read that book. And you don't have to chase all the shiny objects. Yeah, so that's also been a reason. I think that in some ways I've tried to lower the barrier to entry to my books with shorter profiles.
Yeah.
Because I want people to go deep, but if you want to, for instance, help someone who's 200 pounds overweight to lose weight, you don't try to boil the whole ocean at once.
Yeah.
You don't try to change 17 behaviors.
Yep.
You just say, okay, let's just fix your breakfast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I want you to try it. And by fix, I'm not talking forever. I'm talking about a 2-week experiment. And then they fix their breakfast, which, for those people wondering, would probably be because I have helped people lose. I've helped, well, through the books, not indirectly, but dozens of people to lose 100+ pounds.
Yeah,
I mean,
insane.
it's probably hundreds of thousands of people. I just know directly.
Yep.
And if for those people who might be overweight or are listening, you don't have to pay for any of this information. You can just search how to lose 100 pounds on the slow carb diet. And it's a blog post I wrote, which has photographs that will blow your mind, before and after photographs, and lays out all of the rules that you need to know.
Yeah.
It's very simple. But let's just say the breakfast is 3 eggs of any type, some beans, canned beans, could be refried even, if you want to be sneaky about it. It's okay. And then some microwavable spinach, right? Or raw spinach. You can just eat it like a horse, which is something that I do. Because I'm a savage and lazy. And
is there some in one of those bags?
No.
I just
Although
picture like raw spinach.
we can talk about this separately, but I do have. You were saying if the apocalypse comes or whatever, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I do have caches around the country, so I have trunks full of various things that I might need.
Like buried?
They're not buried.
Where do you put
So they're a little more hipster. They're not buried. They're in hotels. So for, let's say, New York, like if I had an amazing opportunity that came up right now, and I need to go to New York where it's freezing cold, be there for 2 weeks, I have everything I need there in a trunk in a hotel that has my name stenciled on it.
If shit gets weird, man, I'm calling you. I just hope you take
so
my call.
that I don't know. I don't have to pack anything. And I would have, in that case, like canned lentils, coconut oil, canned sardines, handful of things like that. But let's just say that's the breakfast, right?
Yep.
I can get almost anyone to do that for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
With enough data, right? If I have them, or data sounds too sterile.
Yeah.
If I have them look at the before and after photos, I'm just like, look, do you want to lose weight? Right? Like, let's have an honest conversation, because I don't want you to feel pressured.
Yeah.
But for your health and for your longevity and for maybe even your kids, for your sense of self-worth, would it be beneficial to lose excess weight?
Yeah.
And do you want to, like right now? Because the pain has to be sufficiently strong, or the desire has to be sufficiently strong that you will actually go through a small amount of discomfort with changing a behavior.
Yeah.
Right? But assuming that they get on the train and I say, all right, look, let's call a spade a spade. A lot of people will call what I'm about to tell you fat shaming, but it's not. Like, you're overweight.
Yeah.
You don't want to be overweight. I can't imagine you're happy being 200 pounds overweight, or happy with that, at least.
Yeah.
You don't have to accept the partial completeness. You aren't just that way.
Yeah.
You eat like a fat person.
Yeah.
So you are fat.
That's the biggest.
And that is the fucking greatest news in the world.
Yeah.
Because it's clearly fixable, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. So let's start with your breakfast for 2 weeks. And then I'm going to tell you what you're going to see. You are going to feel less hungry during the afternoon. A, B, C, D, and E things are going to happen. You're going to start to make better decisions, even though I'm going to ask you or tell you right now you don't need to.
Yep.
Nonetheless, you're going to start to make small decisions. You're going to start nudging yourself in tiny little ways. And I would suspect if someone's 200 pounds overweight, you change your breakfast, after 2 weeks, you will probably have lost at least 10 pounds.
Yeah, and then you can't wait to change your lunch.
Now, you're like, okay, Ferriss.
All right, Tim.
Now I will listen. Like, all right, let's look at phase 2.
Yeah.
And then you do that, and within very short order, people have completely transformed and reinvented themselves.
Yeah.
And but it starts with something small.
Yeah. I think so much of this shit is like setting yourself up for wins, right? Like when you look at most diets or training regimens or almost anything, they're set up to feel like a failure.
Yeah.
It's set up to like on day one, you're maybe going to come out strong on day one, on January 1st, your New Year's resolution, right?
Yeah.
By January 3rd, you feel like a loser because you lost that day. You didn't hit your goals. And then you give up because now you're a loser. You're back to being your old loser self, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like if you just can, what I've learned even about myself is if like you can pick the goal and set it up to be winnable. And if you're consistently losing, then dial back what the goals are. You know what I mean?
Underdo it.
Go, yeah, because there's nothing like waking up the next morning feeling like you're starting your day as a winner. Also with the, starting your day with wins, which I know you're really big on, but the fuel that gives you, as opposed to waking up and being like, man, I failed the last 3 days. Let's see if I can conquer today.
Yeah.
Screwed.
And also to recognize that the vast majority of people in the U.S. are overweight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The vast majority of people in the U.S. also have New Year's resolutions, and they continue to be overweight.
Yeah.
So you need to do something different, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not working,
It's
whatever
just,
the common playbook is.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I forget about the breakfast for a second. All right. I'll tell you a short story about a friend of mine, which is the type of workaround that I talk a lot about in my writing.
Uh-huh.
Good friend of mine, AJ Jacobs. So he's a writer, never has been an athlete.
Yeah.
And he wanted to get in shape. And I might get some of the details of this story wrong, but it's mostly accurate.
Yeah.
And he's a very funny guy. He's a writer for Esquire and other media. And he wasn't morbidly obese, but he described his physique as a python that swallowed a goat. Like just like kind of dad paunch, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, no, I got to fix this. But he knew exactly what he had to do.
Uh-huh.
He just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? For whatever 1,000 different reasons, he just wouldn't do it and excuses. So he wrote a check, he's Jewish, to I want to say it was the American Nazi Party for $1,000.
Uh-huh.
And he gave it to his wife, who also was keen on him losing weight.
Yeah.
And said, if I don't lose X number of pounds by Y date, I want you to mail this to the American Nazi Party. And then I'll be on record as a Jew having sent a check to the American Nazi Party.
And what happened?
He lost the weight.
Yeah.
And for most people, there's no consequence to not following through on the steps necessary to reach their New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everybody to ask if there's if there's something you've really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And you haven't, that has a fairly defined path.
Yeah.
Right? Is it because you don't have the right information? Is it because you have information that isn't sustainable?
Mm-hmm.
All right, those are valid. Or is it because you don't have a sufficient reward or punishment in place?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the majority.
Right? Or do you just not really want it? I mean, for instance,
that's the majority.
Right? I grew up watching like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, and I had like full splits. My New Year's resolution every year for like 15 years was full splits.
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, I don't really care that much.
Yep.
I wouldn't really, there's not much utility for me to have full splits other than like
an interesting
just
party
try
trick.
to do some dumb party trick and do like splits between two chairs after doing a cake stand or something stupid.
Yeah.
So you can discard those. Like if it's just the someday stuff that you're actually never going to do and don't really, really care about, just get rid of that.
Yeah.
But the incentive piece is huge, and people can go to a site like stick.com, stickk.com, or dietbet.com, which I think has been renamed.
Yeah.
Or they can do it the old-fashioned way. It's like, all right, coming back to the losing weight piece, because the losing weight, I think, is perhaps one of the more common examples of freely available information, path somewhat defined, although there's a lot of misinformation. In terms of sustainable approach, I think slow-carb diet, I make no money, by the way. If you go to the blog post and follow it, I do not make money by you going out and buying lentils at the grocery store. So I find that to be a very sustainable approach, but you could just get 5 of your friends together, say, all right, we all want to lose weight. Let's have a competition, right?
Yeah.
Competition is not scale, meaning not the weighing scale, but like body fat. So you could use something like a DEXA scan, DEXA, or you could just have a gym with the same trainer who uses calipers.
Yeah.
A lot of gyms will provide body fat testing.
We did that here. Did we do pounds or percentage?
Yeah, so you can do pounds. If people are very overweight, you can do just pounds.
Yeah.
But body fat's
No, it's way better. It's way better. I
Better
think
for
that
a
the
lot
people
of
were all similar in like seemed kind of fair because they were all similar in like you know what I mean?
So you can do that. Part of the reason that I strongly recommend body fat is that people who go onto a better diet, which is very often and there's some people who disagree with this. I have a word for them generally, which is wrong.
Yeah.
But it'll be a higher protein diet.
Yeah.
So many people will go from predominantly carb to say a slow carb diet where they'll be eating less food but more protein. They will gain muscle mass.
Yeah.
So if they get on the scale after 2 weeks, particularly women, where it takes there seems to be a longer kind of staging period, and then a lot of women will follow it. Men, it pretty much starts from the beginning, and it's fairly incremental, consistent loss. For a lot of women, for whatever reason, especially past age, say 35 or 40, they'll have what appears to be stasis for about 2 weeks. Nothing will change, weight-wise. And then, boom, it just drops. And there's an immediate, very dramatic drop over the span of a few days. Because, I think in part, the men tend to consume more protein, the women do not. So the women are gaining more muscle as a percentage of body mass. So anyway, let's just say you have an 8-week competition and you take enough money that it's going to hurt if you lose it. And ideally, you have at least one friend who's going to bust your balls forever.
Yeah.
Right?
Because the punishment has to be bad.
Yeah. So you just have like, all right, we're all going to take, let's just say, I'll make this up. Like if I were designing a simple competition.
You should.
And I'm going to
have one on your site.
And I'm going to assume, just for the sake of simplicity, since I'm a dude and it's just easier for me as a dude to sort of empathize and put myself into the shoes of other stupid dudes.
Yeah.
Because we're all just really
just slobby,
savage knuckle draggers who's just like left to our own devices would be living in a cardboard box like eating ramen. So I'm assuming that I'm like speaking to that very uncivilized crowd. So women, you'll probably have more refined approaches.
Yep.
But I'll be like, all right, guys, this is what we're going to do. All right, so we have 5 guys who are friends. We're going to take with just like unflattering overhead, like incandescent lights, like dentist office lighting, and a flash on the phone. Everyone's going to get down to their underwear. We're going to take like front backside photos.
Yep. That's a must.
Like in the morning when people just look at their worst.
The worst. Yeah.
All right. And then we're each going to call it $100, $500, whatever is really going to hurt if you lose.
Yeah.
All right. Doesn't necessarily have to be a lot. Could be very low, but let's say it's $100.
Yeah.
So you have 500 people, $500. All right. The winner, person who loses the greatest percentage body fat, gets $500. The person who loses the least, everybody has all the photos now. Person who loses the least has their photos posted on somebody else's Facebook.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
And then you set a couple of other rules of engagement, and then off you go.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
fucking guarantee you, all of those assholes are going to lose weight.
That's true. That's true.
Because they know frickin' Tony, who they've known since 9th grade, is just hoping to God that he can post their photos on Facebook.
It's so true. You need like that. You need that like real embarrassment.
Yeah, and it's not depressing, it's useful. Right? So there are many different ways to do it, but you can also play those games for anything. I mean, and it doesn't have to be embarrassing, but there has to be a cost associated if you don't do it.
So important too to
people
have
do
like,
their jobs
friends.
because they'll get fired if they don't.
Yeah.
If there were no consequence and you got paid anyway, people wouldn't do their jobs.
Yeah.
So of course, people are not going to follow a behavioral change if there's no consequence.
Yeah, and it's so important too to have someone like a group of friends or somebody, because I just think most people left up to managing themselves just won't do it. Like if it was like, if I don't lose the weight, I'm mailing this check to the Nazi party.
It'll never happen.
You just wouldn't do it.
Yeah, so you can go to a place like stickk.com and choose your anti-charity, and they'll take your money in escrow and do it for you.
Fuck, that's good.
So and but also, I would encourage people to be first and foremost collectors of questions.
Yeah.
Because thinking and interacting with the world, so whether in your own head or in conversation, if you want to get 10x results you are getting right now, or have 10x the peace of mind that you have right now,
Yeah.
it's all better questions.
Yeah.
And so if you come across interviews or books or people who ask questions, you're like, wow, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Take a note.
Yep.
Look at it. Ponder it. And collect those, because that is your toolkit.
Yep. 100%. So let's get in. I want to tell your story a little bit, because I think one thing, even for me personally, like I had listened to quite a bit of your podcast, read a few of the books, but it wasn't until I read 4 Hour Work Week late. Read it recently. And that, when I was really reading that and hearing a little bit more about your story, is when I even really more was like, damn, Tim's just a dope guy. Like, I didn't really know where you came from, what led you to this, like, to this level where you're at right now. So you said you grew up in Long Island.
I did.
What was childhood like for you in Long Island?
I would say that I was a lower middle class upbringing.
Yeah.
My parents never made more than, say, 50 grand a year combined.
Yeah.
Dad was an independent real estate broker, solopreneur of sorts. Very feast or famine in that area in particular. And then my mom worked for the county and was a physical therapist for geriatric patients who couldn't leave their homes, primarily.
What a career choice.
Yeah.
Did she just like helping people?
My mom has a lot of compassion.
Yeah.
And had a tough time in school in the beginning.
Okay.
I I remember this is sort of a sign of things to come, but I refused to learn the alphabet in kindergarten and was made to eat soap by Mrs.
Your
Bevan.
teacher
by
made
Mrs.
you eat
Bevan.
soap?
Yeah, literally. I mean, it's straight out of some movie from the 40s. I was like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, I was just like, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't even have a frame of reference for it. I just knew I was eating soap in front of the class, which is quite terrible, as it turns out.
Yep.
And
It was always a threat for me. I never actually had to do it.
Yeah, I refused to learn the alphabet because she wouldn't explain why I needed to learn the alphabet.
That's incredible. How old were you when that happened?
I was tiny. I don't know, kindergarten. And then I got put on, there were a number of notable incidents in kindergarten. Number one, I got put at the bad table with a friend of mine named Dennis. And then she forgot it was the bad table, and we stayed at the bad table all year, thinking that it was the bad table. So she forgot, but we didn't forget. So we were just like the bad kids at the table.
Yeah.
And I was very small. I was born premature. So I was very, very small up until 6th grade, and was bullied a lot and beat up a lot. So I spent a lot of time in the classroom, even during recess. I would just stay in the class because the playground was not a safe space for me. It was not.
Yeah.
It was not a good place for me to be. And I remember one time I built this like huge, in my mind, it was probably 10 inches tall, but in my mind, this like gigantic cathedral. I spent all of recess building this huge building out of building blocks. And some bully came in and kicked the whole thing over. And he was like, and I was like sitting on the floor. So I just like cat paw club punched him right in the balls and dropped him. And then I had to write an apology letter. And my mom kept the letter, which is hilarious. And so I have a scan of this letter that is like,
I'm sorry, I punched you in
Dear
the
Michael,
balls.
I apologize for punching you in the privates, and so on and so forth. But
And your mom still has it.
Oh yeah,
You still have it. Yeah. Jeez.
And then I won't take you through each grade. I'm not going to give you a Dr. Evil.
Yeah, I just want to like wrap my head around how Tim Ferriss was formed.
Yeah, I was. I had a tough time until Mrs. Vinsky in 1st grade, who pulled me aside because I was still very much digging my heels, and she said, "Tim, if you learn to read the alphabet, you can read books, any book you want." And I was like,
"That's what did it."
What?
Got it. Yep.
And my parents were always very supportive. We didn't have a lot of money. Lots of TV dinners.
Yeah.
But it never even occurred to me that we didn't have enough money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's how my childhood was.
Yeah, it's like, all right, sure, like the walls in my room were peeling, right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't get the new bike.
Yep.
But I just thought that was a decision my parents made.
Yeah, it's so true, man.
I didn't see the constraints.
That's an art form of parenting.
Yeah. And they did say one thing, though, that was very important early on. They said, in effect, if you want books, we can always find a way to get books. So by necessity or by choice, I don't know, they trained my brother and I to figure out ways to be interested in books because it was the only thing that we had a budget for. Right?
Yeah.
And then we would go to the bookstore and generally go to the remainder table, which is a table where they have all discounted books, and find stuff there. And
God, that's so good.
so that's what made me want to become a marine biologist for a very, very long period of time. It was this big book. I think it was just called The World of Fishes. That I reread over and over and over again. Sharks in particular, of course, as a boy.
Yep.
And so school was viewed as our education, but my parents didn't put it that way. It's like, if you get good grades, you can do anything you want. It was basically not do anything you want in the house, but like do anything you want in life.
Yep.
Was sort of the way it was framed. So we took homework and schooling really seriously. But I got the shit kicked out of me all the time up until 6th grade. I was really, really
just because you were small.
Yeah, I mean it's like Lord of the Flies.
Yeah,
man. I mean it's
you're
elementary school.
It is, yeah.
With a bunch of like rednecks on Long Island. Yeah, you just like you're the small kid. It's like, all right, we're gonna play kickball with your head. And I remember one day, this is kind of hilarious. I'll just for shits and giggles, I'll tell the story. Last day of class. This is like straight out of a Hallmark movie or something. Last day of class in 5th grade, I had gotten horribly burned, and I was sitting in the front of class, being the nerd and teacher's pet as per usual, and also just trying to stay away from like the cool / bully kids who are always in the back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was finishing something up on my desk as all the kids were leaving for summer vacation. And this was in Mrs. Talmadge's class. She was a really old, like grizzled, leathery woman with a southern accent. Sounded a bit like Ross Perot.
Yeah.
And a great teacher. And so these last two bullies were walking down between the desks on the way out of class. They're the last people in the class, except for me. Save me. I'm sitting in the very front. And Mrs. Talmadge is doing something at her desk. And they walk by and they know I'm just beat red. Right? And so one of them, the bigger kid, just goes, "Have a good summer, Tim." Wham! And like smacks me on the back, like open palm, like slaps me on the burn. Right? And I hold it together, didn't say anything in response, like held it together for 15 seconds until they got out, and then just like burst into tears, right? And then Mrs. Talmadge, I kid you not, she's like, "One day, Timmy, you'll show him, Timmy. One day, you know." And I was just like, "Ooh," and she's like, "Oh, I'm always," you know, I just couldn't like. I was so just distraught.
Yeah.
And then I swear to God, that summer, right? I'm just this like tiny round. That summer, I go away to camp. And I gain like 6 inches and about 50 pounds over 3 months. But I'm not there on Long Island for the summer. So like nobody sees this take place, right? Yeah. So then I come back 6th grade, first day, and I'm just like,
oh shit, look at Timmy.
All you motherfuckers, this is my year. And it was like Arya Stark in Game of Thrones. I had like my list. I was just like, okay, all right. Andrew, remember me? And like grab his head and fucking smash it on the table and just beat the shit out of everyone. And I would love to say, not the good guys, not the good kids, just like all the kids who had bullied me for so long. And I'd love to say, like, you know, looking back, I really should have just sat down and had a conversation with them, and I regret being so violent. I don't at all.
No,
it was glorious.
No,
I just rolled through them like Mad Max. It was amazing.
God damn.
I got in so much trouble. I had so many visits to the principal's office. All worth it. It was great. But
sometimes it's worth it.
Yeah,
I mean, like sometimes you just gotta. Like,
yeah, it was so good. I remember this one kid. He still thought I was. He couldn't compute that I wasn't the same kid.
Yeah.
Don't do this at home, kids. I'm not recommending this. But I'm pumped full of like Nirvana steroids, right? I mean, I'm just like what I was hormonally at that point in time is like what every elite athlete who has $100 million contract is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to achieve. But that was like my normal state, right? Yeah. So I'm just like the Hulk all day long, every day, and have absolutely no emotional control whatsoever. And I remember this bully came up to me. I don't know if you guys had these in your classes. God, I don't know if I ever told this story. But there would be like a little sink, and then one of those metal paper dispensers, like the brown paper dispensers that you roll with, with a little. Looks like something you would wind up a toy with on the
like
side.
Like the Z-shaped.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a metal paper dispenser, and then a little sink. And so he came over. This was during lunch, and he did something like he slapped my face or grabbed my ear, and I was like, okay, and I just grabbed his head. I grabbed his head by the back of his hair and just slammed his head like 20 times into this paper dispenser. And even the teacher was just like, what? And just froze. Like she couldn't even like absorb the reality of what was happening. And it wasn't like I did any real damage to him. You know, thankfully at that age, like even in 6th grade, it's like, it's not like 2 professional MMA fighters wailing at each other. Yeah. You know, the worst going to happen is he'll be a sniveling cunt for an hour or so, like with a bloody nose, and people will be like, yeah, you deserve fuck that kid.
Timmy's back.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, you're kind of like Ralphie in A Christmas Story.
It's incredible.
Like punching that kid on the ground.
I think every kid who was ever bullied wants that school year that you had.
Yeah,
you had the dream come true.
It was a real gift. So thank you, universe, for that. But anyway, I know we spent a lot of time on that 6th grade.
That was worth it.
But that was a really important year.
Yeah.
Because I finally had like some shred of confidence or established some shred of confidence. And which is why I think also physical training is so important. Like even if you don't view yourself as an athlete, even if you've never been an athlete, I think mandatory sports in school, high school and elementary school is really important.
Yeah.
But I won't dwell on that. Just as a tool for developing confidence. And so where should we go from there?
What about as you grew into like high school, Tim? How did you fit into the pack?
I didn't fit into the pack. I was such a loner when I was a runt and getting bullied that I never really came out of that.
Yeah.
So I never hung with. I didn't really have a clique. I spent a lot of time alone, and I don't view that necessarily as a good thing, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, especially if that's one of your triggers.
I think it compounded a lot of the depression or was a trigger for a lot of the depressive periods.
Yep.
And
were you reading a lot?
I was reading a lot. I always read a lot. At that time it was comic books. I was collecting comic books.
Yep.
And
any sports?
The only sport that I was put into while very small was kid wrestling, because I was very hyperactive, and a bunch of mothers told my mom you can drain his batteries by putting him into kid wrestling. Plus, unlike many other sports, it's weight class based. So like one puny kid gets to battle the other puny kid.
True. Good call.
And one of them gets to win.
Yeah.
Right?
How'd you do?
I did reasonably well.
Really?
Yeah, I did reasonably well. I was born premature, so I had a bunch of physical and still have a bunch of physical problems related to heat exhaustion and low endurance. I had some limiters, but I could function within wrestling. It was the first time that I could actually win at anything physical, potentially, every once in a while.
Yeah, that's big.
And as I got into high school, and now I was on the larger side. By the time I was 17, I was roughly the size I am now.
Got it.
And then really focused on wrestling.
Yep. So that became like a passion.
That became a real passion. And in my senior year, I wasn't the best technical wrestler, but within that league, I ended up transferring from school in Long Island, which is very bad. Yep. After even one of the teachers said, "You got to get out of here."
Yeah.
To a boarding school in New Hampshire, which completely kicked my ass. It was my idea. So I was able to get financial support from my extended family, grandparents, and so on. And went to this very good school called St. Paul's, which it's hard to say every kid, but I would really wish the experience on almost every kid.
You would wish it.
To have the experience to go to a very, very tough love boarding school.
And why for the main reason? It taught you discipline, or taught you
because it pushes you so far into outside of your comfort level that things that come after it seem easy.
Yeah.
And so for instance, the schedule on Long Island was like I could sleep through all my classes and get A's. Right. Yeah. I mean, I was a big fish in a very, very small pond.
Yeah.
In New Hampshire, it was chapel every morning. Just about every morning, classes 6 days a week, mandatory sports, classes started, or chapel started, I can't remember, at like 8 a.m. Last class ended at something like 6:30 p.m. Mandatory sports. Then you had seated meal, coat and tie dinners, like Dead Poet Society style, a few nights a week. It was
no free time.
It was a lot. No, you don't have free time. There's no free time.
And how many years did you go there for? One?
No. Oh, well, I went there for, technically I was going to St. Paul's for 3 years, but one of the huge seminal turning points in my life, or formative experiences in my life, was taking my first real trip abroad, which was a trip to Japan as an exchange student after roughly a year at St. Paul's. And that just changed everything for me.
Just the perspective and just seeing like...
Everything was done differently.
Yeah.
So I realized how much of what we do is just a fragile collection of socially reinforced agreements.
Yeah.
Like driving on one side of the road, writing a certain way.
Yeah.
It's all made up.
Yeah.
Right? These are all negotiable rules.
Yeah.
And
it's funny because you can just start to see like Tim Ferriss forming, right?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? You can see like...
Yeah, Japan blew my mind.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind. Also just the fact that the language was so different, right? English is I eat the apple, subject, verb, object.
Yeah.
Japanese is subject, object, verb. I the apple, eat, right?
Yeah.
It's completely mixed around. It's weird to us, but to them, they're like, English, for fuck's sake. How do you come up with this mangled language?
Yeah.
You know?
Let me ask you this. At that time, were you starting to form any idea of like what you thought your path through life would be, or were you still just very much experimenting?
I wanted to be a comic book penciler.
Really?
All the way up until the middle of college.
Wow.
At which point I thought I might want to be a neuroscientist.
Jesus
and
Christ.
I ended up going to Princeton, which, by the way, my guidance counselor at high school told me I shouldn't even apply to. That son of a bitch.
Yeah, why?
I can tell you, it's so fucked up. But what is his incentive? How does he get evaluated by his boss? He gets evaluated by saying 90% of the kids I advised got into their first choice school.
Yeah.
What's the easiest way to do that?
That's a flawed
to make
model.
Their first choice school a lower caliber school. So I came back and he's like, Tim, let's be honest. Like your schools that you say you want to go to, they're not going to happen.
That's not good for my record.
Okay?
So,
yeah. Like,
let's get you
in brackets, like in thought bubble. So like, let's do this, this, and this. Unfortunately, I had somebody there, Reverend Greenleaf. I'm not a religious guy, in the conventional sense at least, but who said, just apply. You should apply. And I did.
That's such a flawed model.
It's crazy,
man.
right? So like how many people, because of some conversation like that, with some self-interested human, which like unfortunately or fortunately we're all self-interested, right?
Yeah.
But as a kid, you can't view, or you don't view the world through that lens, but have been steered away from some future because of that.
Yeah,
it's
at the
crazy.
time, you look at them as the all-knowing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? A teacher or an adult or a parent or somebody gives you that little bit of bad advice.
Yeah.
You look at them as like, oh shit, well, you know better than I do.
Yeah, right. And so I got to end up going to Princeton, and which in retrospect I don't think was a good choice for me.
Why?
It's very conservative in a lot of ways, and the weather is terrible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was staying in these extended dark periods.
Yeah.
And as some people may know, I've written a bit about it, and recently actually got up on the stage, the main stage at TED in the first session,
I saw that.
Talked about it. But in college, I mean, I came very close to committing suicide.
Yeah.
Really close. And I mean, as close as you can come. I mean, really.
Like gun to the head, yeah?
Not literally gun to the head, but like, all right, here are my 3 plans.
Yeah.
I just need to handle a few logistics.
Yeah.
And then we're ready to go.
Jesus Christ.
Like ETA 2 weeks type of planning. And then just by sheer luck, what ended up happening, and for those people who may be in a very dark place, I'm not saying I can solve it, but I would ask you to consider A, seeking professional help, most important, but B, if you perhaps just have that tendency and want to think about it differently, to just go to tim.blog/TED. And the talk and some guidelines are there that I found very helpful.
Yeah, it was really good.
Or you can look up some practical thoughts on suicide, which I wrote up, which was the hardest thing I've ever written in my life. I mean, not even my parents knew.
Yeah.
But what happened at the time was the reason I didn't kill myself, the reason I'm here today was pure dumb luck. And uh, it was that I had gone to Firestone Library, which is the library at Princeton, tried to find a book. I think it was the Final Solution or some handbook to suicide.
Yeah.
And it was out, which tells you something already, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, that's like,
it had been taken
don't
out
they
by been taken out by another student.
You're telling me they don't just follow wherever that book goes?
Yeah, and so I put in a request for the book, right? So that I would get a notification when it was available.
And nobody called you and said, "Hey, Tim,
well, no, here's
okay?"
what happened. So I moved off campus, and a lot of colleges, a lot of universities have a very unhelpful and I think terrifying policy that may be unwritten of taking kids who are going through a very difficult emotional period
Yeah.
and getting them off the university as quickly as possible. Because
To get them away from the other kid?
no, because they don't want a kid to commit suicide on their watch.
God.
So they just send them off to be on their own,
Yeah.
which is the worst thing they could possibly do.
Yeah.
And so I ended up living still in New Jersey, but about 20 minutes away. And I forgot to update my address at the registrar's office, my mailing address. So what happens? They send a postcard. Good news, Tim Ferriss. Your reservation for Final Solution has arrived at Firestone Library, and it got sent to my parents.
Oh, man.
And so I got this call from my mom, and you could hear her voice kind of breaking up, asking me about it. And I was very, I tap danced pretty well.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh no, you don't have to worry. My friend goes to Rutgers. He's doing a research project. Wanted to reserve the book, so I did it for him. You have nothing to worry about."
Jesus.
Right?
Yeah.
Total lie.
Yeah, but a good one.
But it was enough of a pattern interrupt to hear my mom sort of nervous and breaking up on the phone like that.
Yeah.
To just snap me out of it. To
And that was it.
realize like killing yourself is actually really the most selfish thing you can do.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just like strapping on a suicide vest and getting all of your most loved people in one room and just blowing them all to pieces.
Yeah.
And they will blame themselves forever. So but it took that luck to snap me out of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, good God, here we are.
Jesus.
So crazy. So it's been important to me to talk about, which is very recent, right? I mean, the TED Talk that I just mentioned, I mean, that was just, oddly enough, this past April 24th, 10 years to the day of the publication of the 4 Hour Workweek.
Really?
Got on stage.
Was when the TED Talk was?
I got on stage to show a picture of myself, huge smile on my face, taken like 3 weeks before I was planning on killing myself.
Jesus. You think that's a big motivational force for you? The fact that you've been in such a dark place and pulling yourself out of it and saying, "Hey, we can all do this. Like, I can help you guys do this too."
It's a big driver, yes.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it's just tragic to think of how many people have been. I've had several very, very close friends kill themselves. Just how many people have thought mistakenly that the darkness would never end.
Yep.
Or that they were fatally flawed, uniquely flawed. I think that's actually perhaps the most important piece.
Yep. That's like
It's
the
no.
darkest.
It's like, no, you're not uniquely flawed. This is actually very common. And if you look at the blog post that I wrote, some practical thoughts on suicide, look at the comments.
Yeah.
It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments.
Yeah.
You are not alone.
Yeah.
This is very common, but it is a driver for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Because I've seen the damage it does. I've had friends kill themselves. And it's a huge tragedy and waste of human potential.
All around. Like, it's just such a terrible all around thing.
Yeah.
The suffering that the person goes through, the suffering that then the family and loved ones go through.
Yeah, not just the extreme end of suicide, but just chronic depression or consistent depression.
Yeah.
So looking at that very carefully is part of the reason that I'm funding scientific research looking at modalities like certain psychedelics, psilocybin, say at Johns Hopkins and other universities that can be studied for helping treatment-resistant depression or end-of-life anxiety, things of that type.
Yep. Okay, only in the sake of keeping the time going, because I know you got to go soon. What was the transition from like that dark time at Princeton all the way to, I mean, you created a really successful business, right?
Yeah, I did. The sports nutrition business.
Yeah.
Well, there were a few, I think, critical moves. The first was I ended up for a number of different reasons coming out of that dark period, which people can read more about on the blog, and then I took a job in California.
Mm-hmm.
What does this get me? It gets me sun.
Damn it.
Right? It's so simple. So immediately, in general, I have a higher set point of happiness just because I'm exposed to sunlight.
Why don't you live in like Hawaii?
Well, I mean, Austin's sunny all year round.
Yeah, you're right. But why the Bay? Why would you live in the Bay for so long?
I was excited about tech.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw my...
So it's not like
I
you
wanted
can
to
get around
I wanted
the
to
weather.
throw my hat in the ring.
Yeah.
And
Same here.
That was an
I
exciting...
want to move
That
there
was
now.
an exciting time. I just wanted to be part of the action, which
Yeah.
I was. It was really exciting. I had like a shitty job, desk in a fire escape or fire exit.
Yeah.
Couldn't even get out of my seat properly. I had to ask another person to move next to me. I was also jammed into the fire exit. But it was exciting.
Yep.
And then I saw the writing on the wall. This is 99, 2000. 9/11 happened. I remember exactly where I was when it happened, everything. Somebody from our company was supposed to be in an office we had in the World Trade Center, and he was sick that day.
Jesus.
Only reason he wasn't dead. And things started to unravel in terms of tech, and I decided to look at my credit card statement. There's more to the story, but the short version is to look at my credit card statement and try to identify what I really understood that I spent a lot of money on.
Yeah.
Where I was price insensitive.
Yep.
Right? Because I was making $40,000 a year before taxes in the Bay Area, where you get 3 roommates and you live in a broom closet for $2,000 to $3,000 a month, right? I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
So you start doing the math, $40K pre-tax in California, it's not.
You're screwed.
Doesn't give you a lot. I
Yeah.
mean, you're
homeless.
Yeah. you're making every dollar count, right?
Yeah.
So where was I price insensitive? And it turned out I was price insensitive related to sports nutrition. I developed a really good understanding of many facets of nutrition and had just enough neuroscience background to be dangerous. And I started making cold calls. I'd gotten very good at cold calls, and I started making cold calls during lunch and after hours to try to learn about how that industry worked. I started traveling to trade shows in my crappy hand-me-down green minivan that I had, which I had for a long time, which my coworkers, male of course, nicknamed the Molester Mobile. I'm like, thanks guys, that's cool. That's the go-to for a shady
I
was
van.
really happy stuck. That was nice to have the whole office calling my van the Molester Mobile.
Yeah.
And over time, I was like, all right, I actually know what I want to build, and I know how to build it. And I convinced all my coworkers to fork over $50 each to prepay for a bottle, which was a form of dry testing, right? So I'm not going to manufacture until I know I can at least cover my costs.
Yeah.
And that's how the whole thing started, and grew to skipping a lot of the ups and downs, but ultimately grew to about a dozen countries in distribution, and ended up selling that company in 2009. But 2004 had a complete meltdown, because the business was running me, not the other way around.
Yep.
I mean, I was working across every time zone imaginable. So I was waking up first thing in the morning, working all the way through the night. You mentioned Hawaii, like working on Hawaii after California closed, and then Japan after Hawaii closed. It never ended.
Yeah.
And this girlfriend at the time I thought I was going to propose to left. And she gave me a plaque, I'm not making this up, that said business hours end at 5 p.m. And she said, you should just keep this on your desk for your own personal health.
Jesus.
And so I really had a psychological meltdown.
Yeah.
I wasn't suicidal. I just felt very lost.
Yeah.
And I felt trapped.
And the business was super successful.
Yeah. Financially, great. Like,
yeah.
I was making more per month, more than twice per month what I had been making per year.
Yeah.
And it didn't fucking matter.
Yeah. That's
the scary part, right? Yeah. It just didn't matter. I mean, I was spending all day chained to a screen. And so I decided to spend 4 weeks in London to just get away from my routine at a friend's house, sleep on his couch. Bought a one-way ticket to either remove myself from the business and figure out systems that would allow me to do that, or shut it down.
Yeah.
That was it.
Because you just couldn't take it anymore.
Couldn't take it. And it worked. So I ended up traveling around the world for 18 months with no set plan, and not living by any calendar whatsoever, really.
Yeah.
And that formed the basis for what became 4-Hour Workweek, where all the lessons learned, the people met, the case studies I ran into over that period of time.
And was that essentially like the shock that led to your entire journey of to where you are now, right? I mean, if you look at it that way, right? From taking the route of starting a company, and maybe you would have went into the entrepreneur zone and kind of done that thing, but like it seems like this kind of shocked you into this whole other path
Yeah.
of where you are now, writing all these books and teaching other people how to do it. Does that seem accurate or?
Well, I mean, each thing led to the next, right?
Yeah.
And none of it's been planned. So, and many of these events have seemed like massive catastrophes and distractions and failures.
Yeah.
Right. But I think there are few people. So one of the thought patterns that comes up repeatedly in Tribe of Mentors, because one of the questions I ask is, "What is your favorite failure?"
Yep.
Right. What failure
I
of
like that
yours
one.
has set you up for a later success?
Yeah.
And what comes up repeatedly is people saying sometimes you need life to save you from getting what you want. One. Another way to put it is sometimes you need life to save you from getting what you want so it can give you what you need.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so in retrospect, it's like if that girl hadn't left, I'd probably still be running a mail order sports nutrition company. There's nothing wrong with that. But holy shit.
Yeah,
right?
that's crazy.
It's crazy to think.
Like
right?
think about if you were just some normal,
like
kind of overworked, successful.
Yeah, but like what a blessing that meltdown happened.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the 4 Hour Work Week came together. There's a lot that goes into it, but suffice to say, I never wanted to write a book. I was teaching a lecture twice a year at Princeton, and one of the classes that had a huge impact on me, high-tech entrepreneurship. And slowly, my lecture that I taught changed from how to scale a bootstrap business to lifestyle design. This concept of defining how you are going to use your most valuable, finite, non-renewable resource, which is time. Yeah. What you want your day-to-day, week-to-week existence to look like, and then reverse engineering a business or a career to serve that. And book was turned down violently by 27 publishers, I think.
And how's that process go? Like you reach out, say, "Hey, here's my book. Here's blah blah blah." They say, "No, thank you."
You get an agent.
Yeah.
Who's still my agent to this day.
Yeah, I mean, if he stuck with you through 27.
Yeah. And then they pitch it to editors.
Got it.
Who are in some capacity like talent scouts. A lot of editors don't actually do a lot of editing.
Yep.
They are talent acquisition.
So they kind of co-sign you?
They will go out and find people they think can write good books or sell a lot of books.
Yeah.
So if they see a viral post on the internet, or somebody who suddenly explodes in popularity as an Instagrammer, they'll reach out to them and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing a book?
Yeah.
Let me help you to figure out the overarching structure, and then you can run with it.
Yep.
And I will bring you into the fold of this publisher so we can handle X, Y, and Z logistics." All right. So the general process then right now, or at least when I was doing it, was you find an agent pitches editors, an editor then makes the case, if they're compelled, to a larger group, including, say, a publisher, who then does the sign-off, the financial sign-off. And then they give you an advance, which says, "Okay, you need to take time to write this book. We're going to give you money so you can take time. And we're prepaying you for royalties." That's what an advance is. Yeah. And we're going to pay you in 4 installments or whatever it was. 4 or 5 installments. And
so 27 of them said, "This book is not it."
Oh, yeah. Some of them were really, really aggressively rude about it. And then, so Crown within Random House bought it for next to nothing.
Yeah. And that changed your life. I mean, that was, and you didn't even expect it to be a hit,
no,
right? You
nobody expected it to do anything. I mean, the initial print run was 10,000 copies. You're not even nationally distributed, really, at 10,000 copies.
Yeah. How many have you sold now? Over
millions and millions.
Millions,
in 40 plus languages. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
It's crazy.
And so that was what set you on this journey of what you are now, starting the podcast.
And by the way, for those people wondering, I didn't write the book to appeal to as many people as possible. Yeah. That's the irony. I wrote the book. All right. So I wrote maybe 4 chapter drafts that I threw out at first because it was too serious and pompous sounding, too Princetonian and stupidly highbrow. Just like using $10 words when a 10-cent word will suffice. Yep. And I was like, "Oh, this is terrible." So I threw out 4 chapters. Then I tried it again, going the opposite direction, drank a little too much wine. Yep. And it ended up being like the 3 Stooges. I'm like, all right, well, this is equally bad, version. Just the other direction. Yeah. And then I sat down and said, all right, let me actually open a window and pretend like I'm writing an email to 2 of my friends. Yeah. One who is trapped in a decently paying job. Yep. Actually, a well-paying job, investment banking, that he secretly hated. Yeah. But
so you picture an actual person.
Yeah. Real person. Yeah. but he had all the trappings. He was getting trapped,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And it's like, well, I don't have any time, but I can buy a car. Okay.
Yeah.
And I can buy a Porsche or whatever. And then another friend who'd created his own business, and much like me, felt trapped in a monster of his own making.
Yep.
And I wrote for those two people. That's it.
Yeah.
And
It's good. The language is good. Like, I just think, yeah,
yeah,
the way you wrote it is good.
So here we are.
And then, so that set you on this journey. Then you started, did the podcast come after that?
Oh, podcast came much later.
But I mean, like, was there another book in between or no?
Oh, yeah. So I had the 4-Hour Work Week, then the 4-Hour Body,
Yep.
which where a lot of the diet stuff we're talking about comes from.
Got it.
Which set the stage for a lot of things to happen. I mean,
Yeah.
that book, because I was at the bleeding edge of a lot of that stuff,
Yeah.
and was able to reach out to all sorts of experts no one actually had known about in the wider world. I mean, that if people go back and look at that book, it was published in 2010. There's very little I would change.
Yeah.
And a lot of what has become very, very popular now was talked about in that book.
Yeah.
Cryotherapy, you name it, it's in there.
Yeah.
And then the 4-Hour Chef, which is about accelerated learning.
Yep.
And I was completely burned out of writing books after that. And that's when I started the podcast, just as something to shake my muscles out and relax for a bit of time.
Yeah.
Had no intentions to really.
And now it's the biggest.
Had no thought of monetizing, no thought of anything. It was just sitting down with my equally foolish friends who occasionally have very interesting things to say and drinking wine and just being idiots.
So that's how it started.
That's totally how it started. If you listen to the first episode of the podcast, I get sloppily drunk.
I got to do that
with my friend Kevin Rose. It's embarrassing.
Because you still do the drunk. What do you do it where you drink wine? And
Drunk
you respond
dial.
To,
well,
drunk
I
dial.
asked myself a question, which actually pops up in the Tribe of Mentors a lot, which is, what would this look like if it were easy?
Yeah.
So we often correlate effort and redlining with producing good results, but as I get maybe a little older, I really look for elegance, and I'm asking myself, what would this look like if it were easy?
Yep.
And so looking at the podcast, I was like, all right, well, I have one format, which is interview. What other formats can I experiment with?
Yeah.
And that would be fun and kind of prankster-ish. I
one.
like absurdity and playfulness. And I was like, all right, well, why don't I just put out on social that I'm going to do a drunk dial evening where I sit there with a bunch of gin and soda and I send people a link to a Google Doc or a Google form and I say, all right, first come, first served. Give me your Skype name or phone number. I'm going to call you from Skype. I'm just going to keep drinking. You guys can ask me questions and I'll answer your questions. I'll record the whole thing. And that'll be the podcast. So I did it and it fucking worked. I was like, really? Are you kidding me? Like that actually worked?
Yeah.
And sponsors will still pay for spots? You got to be kidding me. This is amazing. So I just continue to tool around with ridiculous stuff like that. And then the podcast, again, not making a podcast for the entire world, thinking about a handful of people who have said to me, oh, I wish I was there for X, Y, and Z conversation you had with so-and-so.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, God, like the conversation I had with this other person. I got the Russian bathhouse. Fuck, man. Like that would have been the best, because I listened to podcasts. And I have for a long time. Like that would have been the best 2-hour podcast, but it's gone. And I was like, well, why don't you just start recording them? Okay. And
it exploded. Was there one moment when it exploded, or it just slowly grew?
There were a few turning points, or inflection points rather. I would say Arnold Schwarzenegger was a big one. That took about 1.5 years to schedule.
Got it.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, who then ended up writing the foreword for Tools of Titans.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which is bonkers.
Yeah.
And
too good.
Gotten to know him over time. He's more impressive the better you get to know him. It's just a different species. Jamie Foxx was another one. Jocko Willink, who no one had heard of, but I mentioned him earlier. This legendary Navy SEAL commander. His first public interview.
So it's really been more like big interview, just quality content.
A lot of the biggest interviews. If you analyze the podcast downloads properly. Which means not just looking at total downloads, because then there'll be a heavy recency bias. So you have to apply some statistical modeling, which I got help to do. And I can actually, let's look at this for a second. So if we look at the top 25 episodes, which are at the back.
Oh, you have them in the back of there.
Yeah. And I'm not aware of anyone who's done the analysis that we did. But if you look at, all right, so if you look at the top, say, 6 podcasts that I've done. Number 1, Jamie Foxx on workout routine, success habits, and untold Hollywood stories. Tim.blog/Jamie, right?
Yep.
Second one, the scariest Navy SEAL I've ever met and what he taught me. That's Jocko's.
Yeah.
Nobody knew about Jocko.
Yeah.
Right? So that's
just
in the wider
episode.
world, an unknown person.
Yep.
And then you have Arnold Schwarzenegger on psychological warfare and much more. That's a fun one. Tim.blog/Arnold. All right, number 4, Dom DeAgostino on fasting, ketosis, and the end of cancer. People don't know Dom.
No.
Or
And
most
that's a pretty,
people don't. This was one of his first larger, long-form podcasts. He's a published researcher and scientist operating out of Florida.
And that's a pretty like niche sort of topic.
Super niche,
Yeah.
you would think.
Yeah.
But it turns out niche can be pretty big. Tony Robbins is the next one.
Of course.
Tony always brings the thunder on morning routines, peak performance, and mastering money.
Yeah, I saved the morning routine one of his.
Yeah, and then number 6, How to Design a Life, Debbie Millman, who's a well-known designer, but most people do not know who Debbie is.
Yeah.
So in the top 6 out of 300 plus, half of them are people no one's heard of.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yep.
Right?
It's interesting, man. I'm noticing that too. Like the content is winning over the name.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I've had some on where I'm like, oh, here it is. I'm going to go ahead and go to the top of the charts. And like nobody gives a shit.
Nobody gives a shit, man.
No.
I mean, like it's not the headline that matters.
It's good though, because I don't want to spend my life chasing celebrities, right? I'd rather just work on the
waste
content.
of time.
Yeah. Okay, so final thing, and I'll let you get out of here. You've done a million things. You've lived 57 different lives. You have put out more content and put yourself through more testing than any man almost on earth, I would say.
I've done a lot.
I'm going to give you that title.
Yeah.
What's the sort of, if you could pick your dream sort of legacy, you're 80 years old and you're sort of sitting and looking back on your life and what you did and what value you added and all this stuff. What's your dream situation there? Like, how's that look?
Oh, I know. It's very easy.
Yep.
That, at least at this point, this is how I'm thinking about it, but that I created an army of benevolent super learners
Yeah.
who were constantly testing assumptions, testing partial completeness, anything they accepted about themselves that was, oh, I'm just
Yep.
X, oh, I just can't Y, where they actually tested it, but they had the toolkit to do that.
Yep.
And not only that, this is the most important part, perhaps, is that there's this army of benevolent super learners who then self-replicate,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because each one of those people, I want every one of them to be better than I am, far
Yeah.
better, or to have that, and they certainly have the potential. I mean, for everything I did in the 4-Hour Body, and there's some crazy experiments in the 4-Hour Body with results that are kind of mind-boggling,
Yeah.
and in the 4-Hour Chef, for everything that I did, where people are like, "That's impossible! Holy shit!" I can point you to at least 12 people who got better results, who
Yeah.
figured out a better way to do it.
Yeah.
It almost nothing makes me happier.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
So it would be creating that benevolent army that then can teach friends, family, kids, and just let that ripple effect extend out over space and time.
Yeah, I like that. I like the look of that army. One thing too, I asked this one's always good. If you could go back to 14-year-old tiny little Tim who's just getting picked on and like everything just seems crazy, you're staying to yourself, you're reading, you're like, if you could give yourself one little gem now after everything that you've been through, like just one little word that would maybe make things a little easier, what would that be?
Man, I would probably say, if you don't love yourself, you can't love other people fully.
Mm-hmm.
I've been really unkind to myself.
Yeah.
For a really long time. I viewed it as self-indulgent. I viewed it as
to love yourself. Seems self-indulgent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or to just praise yourself.
Yeah. And do you think that you are now over that, or is it an ongoing management?
I'm a lot better.
Yeah.
I'm a lot better, but it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, yeah.
We're all
always,
still a work in progress.
always
But
is.
I would say something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, on the flip side, I might say anger is a tool. It's not the tool.
Yeah.
So make sure you have other tools in the toolkit, because the acid held in the vessel damages the vessel more than anything it's poured on.
So true.
Yeah.
There it is. Okay, I'll let you get out of here. The book came out yesterday. It's incredible. I don't even care if you're not the reading type, my listeners. Buy this book. It's the type of book that you can wake up in the morning, read 2 pages, and you feel just charged up throughout your day. Everyone's real big right now on taking in this like inspirational content, whether it be through Instagram or some of these YouTube celebrities or whatever it may be. This is real information from very real achievers. And the fact that you can treat it like a coffee table book, skim through it while you're checking your Instagram in the morning or having your cup of coffee, and it will just kind of give you this boost. I love the format. I love the way you're writing these books. It's so, I keep them both right by my bed, and I sort of just notice it's so easy to tap into. So thank you for that. Tell everyone where else to go to find you, to join your army of
benevolent superlatives. Yeah, I would say that there are a number of places you can go. The vast majority of what I put out in the world is free. So you can go to tim.blog. That is where you can find 700 plus articles on everything imaginable: language acquisition, fat loss, the posts that I mentioned, like how to lose 100 pounds on this low carb diet. You can go to tribeofmentors.com also to find sample chapters, the entire list of all the mentors.
Yep.
You'll recognize a lot of the names. And you can also check out the Tim Ferriss Show, which is the first business interview podcast to pass 200 million downloads.
God damn it.
Which you can find at tim.blog/podcast. Which, keep in mind, started with me just being a drunken idiot with one of my friends.
Jesus Christ! And now you're the Michael Jackson of business podcast. It's incredible.
It's crazy. I'd also say if you want to get a flavor for not just inspiration, because inspiration is only one leg of the table.
Yeah.
You also need tactics. You need instructions. You need a blueprint. I can't just tell you how awesome flying a plane is and get you super stoked to fly a plane and sit you in a plane. You will crash and burn. And I think that's the problem with a lot of inspirational content.
Yep.
Is
it's huge right now.
It gets people really amped to do something, and then there is no instruction manual, and people just hit the wall. So you need the tactics. And if you want to get a taste for really specific recommendations, you can also sign up for my newsletter. It is one of the most popular newsletters in the world. It's called 5 Bullet Friday, and it's called that because I send out 5 bullets of cool, useful things that I may be using or pondering that week. And very frequently there's, say, a quote, an article I'm reading. Maybe it's a new supplement, some type of gadget. Could be some startup that you haven't yet heard of because it's not public, but I have access to some weird stuff. And everything in between. So you can find that at tim.blog/Friday. I think at this point there are more than 1 million subscribers. I met, actually, funny enough, about at least a third of the people in this book because they subscribe to 5 Bullet Friday.
Really?
Yeah. So that's another place people could check it out. But yeah, I'm really proud of this book, and I would say that it's probably the easiest to read of my books. So if you want to just sneak your foot, maybe just a toe in the door, and have a sort of infinitely pliable toolkit within arm's reach. I think there are a lot of good books out there, but I think this one's rather unusual, and it does the trick.
I agree.
I only write books that I will look back at as a reference myself.
Yeah.
Right? So this is basically my own personal notebook.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
For toolkits for personal life and business that I would want to have on my Kindle so I could refer to it.
Yep.
Because this isn't me, right? There's parts of me in here.
Yeah.
And there is commentary, but it's 130 of the world's best at every conceivable field.
Yeah, and it's you can just open it up to any page and it's like, let's see what this person says.
Yeah. So it's like, you flip to a random page. All right, so we just flipped to a random page. This is Tom Peters, who's one of the most famous business writers, management theorists out there. And just open to a random page. Excellence is the next 5 minutes. Forget the long term. Make the next 5 minutes rock.
There you go. Start your day with that.
And then it goes into the details of why that's the case. And then I flip to the next page. And people might say, okay, well, that's kind of abstract, perhaps. All right, flip to the next page. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the last 6 months? And he says, well, it's not really less than $100, but I'll tell you about the purchase that's most helped me. And it's a Kevlar 14-foot Vermont dory made by Adirondack Guideboat of North Ferrisburg, Vermont. Right? It's super specific. It's like, oh, shit. Okay. Right. So,
yeah, it's good, man. And it's not like these crazy high level, like they're really, it'll make you order a book that day on Amazon, or it'll make you go buy the thing that's less than $100, or you know what I mean? Like they're very actionable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have people like Steve Aoki, famous musician.
Yeah.
And he talks about like his favorite eye mask, right?
Yeah.
And then someone else talks about their favorite earplugs, and
yeah,
it goes on and on. So it's nearly impossible that you would go through this and not end up
on Amazon
with one tool that you end up telling 20 of your friends about.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, man. You're doing an incredible job. Thank you for all the inspiration. Thanks for coming and doing this.
My pleasure.
And I hope we can stay connected. And if Armageddon goes down, like I said, I'm going to call you. Please just answer my phone. I just need to know where one of your bunkers is.
Everybody have water. Point number 1, recommendation, you can go say 3 minutes without air. You can go 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, and so on and so forth. Have some water. That's step number 1.
Deal.
Is just have water.
Done. Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, man.